Testing, testing. Good afternoon. I'm Lisa Zook, and I direct the Interreligious Institute here at Chicago Theological Seminary, and I'm delighted to welcome you to today's chapel service, which I think will be a wonderful, unique experience for all of you. The stories we tell make or break our world. I first heard these words when I was a CTS student. Laurel Schneider, who was a professor here, shared this phrase in a chapel service. It resonated with me then, and it has stayed with me these many years later. The stories we tell, how we tell them, when we tell them, what we tell, and the stories we hear, where we hear them, how we receive them, what we internalize, what we reject, making and breaking our world. Today's chapel is an opportunity for storytelling, story sharing, and story hearing. We are grateful to welcome 5 professional storytellers to our space today. Each person carries a unique story to bring to this space. I invite you to receive each story, to open yourselves to what is real and true for our storytellers, to let their words and emotions speak to you, and to see how their story might intersect with yours. And to realize that right now, in this moment, there is a new story taking place. A story of all of us, never before in the same room, but through the intricacies and the twisted wanderings of our own stories, brought here to this time, this space, this moment. I invite you to lean into this experience, to be present as you listen. And after we hear from our 5 storytellers, we'll have an opportunity to reflect on this experience. And at the conclusion of chapel, during community lunch, each of you will have an opportunity, if you choose, to share your story. You might have heard that the IRI will be collecting stories at the upcoming Parliament of the World's Religions in Toronto next week, but we are actually starting that process here today with you. We'll give you more instructions once we are gathered for lunch, but I hope that you'll choose to share a story with us during that time. And as we get ready to enter into our chapel time today, I want to just let you know that our 5 storytellers, their names are listed in your programs. We're welcoming Pratik Shrivastava, Anya Cordell, Maureen Muldoon, Nestor Gomez, and our own Kim Schultz. And as we get ready to enter into that time, I invite you to be in a spirit of centering or prayer or meditation. Beautiful people of the world, the ringing of a bell calls us to worship. The pounding of a drum calls us to war. The popping of a cork calls us to celebration. What is the sound that calls us to hear one another? Listen. Listen carefully. It is here, in the Spirit among us, in the sacred and ancient act of giving and receiving our stories, stories that make or break our world. Listen deeply. Amen.
Good afternoon. My story is titled Hindu for the Holidays. I was raised of the Hindu faith. My name is Pratik Sarvastava. It's a very traditional Hindu name given to me by my Hindu parents, Nick and Sheila. What happened there? My parents were raised Hindu, but they have Anglo names because in India, a sign of wealth was to go to Catholic school. My grandparents believe that if you want to get a good job, you have to learn English. So let's name our kids something that will help them get into Catholic school. So my parents have Anglo names. But my parents they never considered being converted to Catholicism. They understood that we can be our own religion and we can go to church and learn English and get good jobs. And that'll be important to us. So when they had me, they said, okay, what is the most Hindu name we can give our son? So they chose Pratik. Now, Pratik translates in English to symbol of a singular life, which if you know anything about Hinduism is not about just one life. It's about multiple lives. So my name is an asterisk. My name is opposite day. It means the exact opposite belief of Hinduism. Also, symbol of just one life. So if you really break it down, my name translates to YOLO. That's what my name means. You only live once. That's the thing that skydivers yell when they jump out of a plane. I'm not the king of skydivers, all right? My heart starts racing when I give an expired coupon at Subway restaurant. So I was raised with the name Pratik, and when I was younger, I realized, okay, I have a different name, but I was never ashamed of my name. But then the holiday of Mother's Day came around. Now, for Mother's Day, you know, my mother, Sheila, she worked very hard. She was actually, for many years when I was a child, she was the breadwinner in the family. So for Mother's Day, she told me and my father, I want the weekend off. Get out of Chicago. So for Mother's Day, when I was 8 years old, me and my father went to Disney World. As a present to my mother, we got out of the house. So I loved Mother's Day. It was great. Got to go to Disney World. I felt like I was less of an outsider. I felt like just one with my Christian friends because they always talked about Disney World and feeling American and being American. So we go to Disney World, and I mentioned Subway restaurant earlier. We go there because my father was like, we're not going to spend $20 on a hamburger at Disney World. Also, we shouldn't spend any money on hamburgers. We're Hindu, and we shouldn't eat beef, but that's a whole other rabbit hole. So we go to Subway restaurant before going to Disney World, and my father tried to give an expired coupon, and they said, no, we're not going to take it. So my father decided to argue with the Subway sandwich artist. There was a lady behind my father. And this lady, she looked like Kathy Bates from Misery. Like the real toe-snapping kind. So she heard my father argue with the Subway restaurant and yells out for all to hear, we're a little impatient now, are we, Haji? She said, Haji. I was 8 years old at the time. Like, Haji, was that the hyena from Lion King? Like, I wasn't sure. I was still in Disney mode, you guys. So I didn't realize that she was trying to be offensive. And so my father then turned around. He didn't look at the Subway sandwich artist and now started directing his anger at Kathy Bates. And they trade some insults. It was great because I got to learn about Hindu curse words in that moment. It's like I was learning a new type of language. It was the first time I was really excited to learn another language, you guys. So they go at it a little bit. They're angry, but I'm in Disney World mode, so I think it's kind of funny. I'm like, oh, Dad's just really friendly, yeah. Then she storms out. But as she storms out, she turns around and spits in my direction. But it lands she was just a really bad aim, so it's like a foot away from me. And my dad sees that, and she's like, did you spit at my son? And chases after her. But as he's leaving, I go, because there was a height difference. So I'm like, Daddy, she missed. Who cares? It didn't register with me that was kind of a hate crime. It didn't register with me because, again, I was just so excited to go to Disney World. So he kind of chases her out. It was one of those scenes from Benny Hill, the music should have been playing. Kind of awkward. My dad, he wasn't in the best shape. So yeah, he runs around a little bit. They trade some words in the parking lot. He comes back to me again, I didn't think of it as a traumatic experience. I'm like, oh, we're just can I really go to Disney World now? I just want to ride the Tower of Terror. Can we please do that? So we go to Disney World. Great day. Got to ride all the rides that I wanted to ride. Space Mountain, Splash Mountain, all the mountains. I got to ride all the mountains, you guys. At the end of the trip, I wanted to get a present. Not for Mother's Day, mind you. No, for me, I want a souvenir. Because I was an 8-year-old, very selfish kid. And so my father said, okay, we'll go to the Disney World store and you can pick out one present. So I go into the store and I look around and I see a wall of personalized keychains with everybody's name on them. Keep in mind, I'm 8 years old, so I'm naive. I'm thinking, yup, I'm going to get my name on a keychain. There are a lot of Prateeks that go to Disney World. There are not a lot of Prateeks that go to Disney World. Prateek was about to be sorely disappointed for the first time in his life, you guys. So I waddle up to the rack, and I realize that there is no keychain with Prateek on it. I start to cry, one single tear. Like from that commercial back in the day with the Native American who sees the wasteland of trash. It was in that one tear, and in that one tear I could see the reflection of every Starbucks cup that butchered my name. I had that one Starbucks cup that said Petite Sriracha. What? That's not even... I'm not Tiny Hot Sauce Starbucks. I start to cry a little bit. That's when my father, he swoops in like a Marine. But first off, he grabs Nick off the keychain rack because Nick is very common. And he says, stop crying, Prateek. Let's see here. They have Patrick. That's just as good as Prateek. And even at 8 years old, I knew Patrick is just not as good as Prateek. Sorry if anyone here is named Patrick. It was kind of like if my father said, hey, you know that movie Karate Kid? They're going to remake that movie with Will Smith's son 20 years from now, and the remake is going to be just as good as the original. So I was like, no, Dad, I don't want the Patrick keychain. So he said, they have Patricia. Do you want the girl's keychain too? I chose Patrick. That's not the end of the story because we fly back to Chicago. I thank my mom for her Mother's Day present to me. And I go to school the next day. And it was hot lunch day on that day. Hot lunch day where, McDonald's would come in and provide hamburgers to the class. And I still don't eat beef to this day. When I was a kid, we didn't eat beef because it was part of the Hindu tradition. You don't eat beef. So as a kid, I didn't eat it because if I don't have it on a day-to-day basis, why would I start to eat it? So on this day, my father got me Pizza Hut. So I'm eating my pizza. There's a student who has his hamburger, and he starts mooing the hamburger at me. He's like, "Moo, moo." Like, he doesn't do a good cow impression. He's an 8-year-old dipshit, you guys. So he's just like, "Moo." I'm eating my pizza, but it's starting to irritate me a little bit. Then there's his other friend who's like the muscle of the group, this bigger dude. He takes his burger, shoves it in my face, like right here. Like, he had better aim than the person who almost spit on me, you guys. So it's like right here. And he goes, "You eat this burger." And I said, "No, I have my but I didn't do it because I was afraid of eating beef. I just really enjoyed my pizza. I was happy with the Pizza Hut personal pan pizza." I said, "No." He starts to chase me around the playground with this burger. You're probably thinking, who was this shitty white bully? But I have to say, you guys, this was another Indian child who was chasing me around. So keep in mind, this was also the first day back from Disney World. So I had put the Patrick keychain on my backpack because my father told me, "We spent a lot of money on this keychain. You have to put it on your backpack." So after getting chased around the pool table, we both go into the principal's office. I thought, okay, I'm going to get to tell the principal that this guy chased me around with the hamburger. That kid, he got off with a warning. He did not get detention. Even though this is like, we're 8 years old. This is like first grade. They didn't even have detention back then. But I got detention. And do you know why I got detention? Because there was a kid in school that day named Patrick. And on this day, he got his backpack stolen. And they thought I stole it. And that was the first day ever that I learned that the justice system is corrupt in this country. That was a great message for Pratik. I mentioned that, my name is Pratik, and I mentioned that my parents were at the Catholic school, and the last part of this story is that Christmas was always big in our household because my parents really clutched on to this idea of being an American. And the same way I clutched onto that Patrick keychain, you guys. And Christmas came to a head this year because I got 2 presents from my parents, Nick and Sheila. One present was this shirt. And let me tell you, this shirt was actually a Father's Day gift to my dad, who then re-gifted it back to me on Christmas, you guys. Because that's how Nick do, you guys. Nick do very well. That's what my father, Nick, gave me. My mother, who, by the way, for Mother's Day, just gave me the gift of Disney World. She decided to pay it forward by giving me, on Christmas, a carbon monoxide detector. Because my mother doesn't want me to die in my sleep, you guys. So I actually moved into a new apartment the day after Christmas. And the first thing I did just for fun was to plug in this detector just to see what would happen, right? It starts beeping. So I freak out. I call my mom. She says, "Okay, here's what you do. Take out the batteries and it will stop beeping." Yeah, they taught that in the Bhagavad Gita, you guys. Yeah, that's very traditional. I took out the batteries. It does not stop beeping. So I call my mother again. She says, "Okay, it's broken. Take it back to Home Depot and return it." That was always my parents' big thing. Take it back and return it. So here's the thing. I don't have a car. So in my state of being a true American, I'm like, yeah, I'm going to take this beeping thing, put it in my backpack, and get on the Red Line train with a beeping backpack. See something, say something. Am I right? You're probably thinking, Pratik, you did not make it to Home Depot that day. And I'll be honest with you guys. I made it to Home Depot that day. Yeah. Racial tolerance in Trump's America. No. That's great. Sure, people were tolerant. That's great, racial progress. But I really believe that the reason I made it to Home Depot on that day was because the people who ride the bus really don't give a fuck that a Hindu American can have a beeping backpack. And at the time, I had a beard like ZZ Top, you guys. So I made it to Home Depot, and I truly believe that that is the American way, that you can go from growing up in the suburbs of Chicago, almost getting spit on, getting chased around with the hamburger by a fellow Hindu, to going to Home Depot with a beeping backpack, which is basically like part 3 on the Homeland Security terror threat scale, I think. Like, that's not even a full terror threat, but it's definitely in there. Like, if I saw someone who looked like me, I probably would have kicked them off the bus. And Nick and Sheila, they would have been like, yeah, that's pretty good too. So that's my story of being Hindu at the holidays, and thank you for listening.
Hi, everyone. I'm so grateful to be here. I'm so grateful that I had a voice when I woke up this morning. It's not my voice, it's a voice. I hope it will last through my story. I never imagined that there was a gas station in this country where you could drive away with a full tank of gas that you didn't pay for, on the promise that you would come back when your paycheck cleared in a week or two. But there was such a gas station until October 4th of 2001. And 2 years later, I was cleaning the bathroom of that very gas station. The way that this happened had to do with my childhood religion. Not Judaism, the other religion of my family, who worshiped at the altar of fashion and beauty. So, and I bought into that religion. For example, I wore individual false eyelashes on the top and the bottom to go to high school. But eventually, as I became a young adult and an adult, I began to realize that I didn't want to be judged solely on my appearance. That's not my true value. And I didn't want to judge everyone else on that basis. And that, in fact, I was, and still, unfortunately, am, because I do sometimes do it, always wrong when I do that. I started using the word appearanceism, the judgments we make about ourselves and others based on appearance, to try to unravel this universal experience that was so deeply familiar to me. And I started to think a lot about this and write about it and speak about it. And then it dawned on me at some point that racism and appearanceism are so deeply intertwined, because the way racism plays out in this culture is almost completely based on snap judgments made on appearance. So then I incorporated that into my thinking and writing and speaking and working. I ended up writing a small, double-sided and illustrated, and wrote a small, unusual book called Race, an Open and Shut Case. An open case and a shut case, to get at the heart of this question of what is race? How many races are there, in fact? And I was invited to bring 2,000 copies of this book and my work to the Parliament of the World's Religions in South Africa in 1999. In between the time when I received this wonderful invitation and took that amazing trip, something very shocking happened. My black neighbor, a black neighbor of mine, was murdered by a white supremacist in the very quiet, kind of upper middle class suburb in which I live, something that was just unheard of, a murder by a white supremacist, in view of my own front door, actually. This galvanized me. The idea that a father couldn't take an evening stroll with his children in the skin that he's in safely. It jump-started my community activism. And 2 relatively short years later came the attacks of 9/11, 2001. And by that time, it seemed that I had antennae on my head that were primed to unfurl the very moment that I heard the first little story of a hate crime in the few days following 9/11. This wasn't the major story because, of course, the major story were the planes and the towers and all of those victims. But the minute that I heard one story about a Sikh gentleman who had been murdered in Arizona, I became riveted by this particular subject. It wasn't just Muslims who were being attacked. It was Sikhs and South Asians and Hindus and Arab Christians. Women were having their headscarves yanked off or being sideswiped in the parking lots of grocery stores. And businesses were being vandalized and burned. And people were being assaulted and even murdered. And I sat at the computer for days and weeks and months on end, just completely magnetized by this issue, amassing every bit of information, particularly about the murders. And one day I was going through my notebook, my thick notebook, and I was looking at the lists that I had made. And I picked up the phone and I called a gas station in Texas because I had read that the Hindu owner of this station had been murdered by someone who claimed that he was a true American, just doing what every patriot would do if they had the nerve. And I had read that his wife had continued to run the station to keep her family going, her parents and her 2 children. And I found the number and I called. I introduced myself and I said, I just want to tell you how sorry I am, how very sad I am about what happened to your husband. And we stayed on the phone for about a half an hour. The call consisted of her crying and my saying over and over again how sorry I am. And in between, customers coming and going, and she'd set the phone down for a moment, and I'd hear the transaction, the buying of a lottery ticket or cigarettes or paying for gas. This became the beginning of a very important and wonderful friendship for me. And I was doing work to try to get aid flowing, support flowing to the families who had lost their breadwinners, and try to get their stories on the front pages of the papers, and to get this written into the history of 9/11 and into the memorial that was built for 9/11. And because of this work, at the 1-year anniversary of 9/11, I was invited to Arizona to speak at the 1-year memorial for the Sikh gentleman who had the distinction of being the first one murdered. And by real grace, I was the house guest of the brother of the man who had been murdered, the brother and his wife and their 3 adorable children. And at the memorial, the young nephew of the victim, whose long hair was twisted up in a little top knot, he got up and he said, I sure wish my uncle would come back and bring some peace like he used to. And tears sprang to my eyes. And about 4 or 5 months later, I was back at home listening to the tape of this event. And that memory that was so burned into my brain What he had actually said was, "I sure wish my uncle would bring some pizza like he used to." And I cried. Actually, I cried much harder. And the next year, I was in Texas. It had become my habit to go to Texas to be with the family of the Hindu man around the time of the murder of their loved one. And at this particular trip, the station had been closed for a small period of time for some necessary repairs, and it was due to reopen the next day. And I and the family were at the station cleaning it, getting it ready for the reopening. The widow's father was scrubbing the pavement around the things that you sell the gas from. Whatever those things. Thank you, gas pumps. The gas pumps. He was scrubbing that pavement. I promise you could have eaten off of that pavement. And the widow was washing, on her hands and knees, washing the floor inside the station. And she came across some blood, her husband's blood, that somehow had gone undiscovered. And she was scraping at it with a single edge razor. It's another one of those indelible memories that I have. And I was cleaning the bathroom. I hate gas station bathrooms. And I don't think that most people love them. But I'm a little, maybe more obsessive compulsive than most. And that bathroom was already clean, but I wanted it to sparkle. And I was cleaning this bathroom with a feeling of real joy. It somehow felt sacred to be doing this. And this whole station was filled with so many associations for me of her two young children crouched behind the counter, which was where their father had died, doing their homework, waiting for their mom to get off of work. And the customers who I met who came and spoke about the real incredible generosity of this man who really would let you fill your tank and drive away, as I said. Eventually, it occurred to me that maybe being Jewish did have something to do with the trajectory of my journey and my work. My mother grew up, she was kind of a Hollywood bathing beauty, and she was a teenager during World War II. And her father's family had all perished in Eastern Europe in the smoke of the Holocaust, and they were basically never spoken of again. And you might be able to visualize the famous Nazi caricature of the ugly Jew, because of course that is what we do when we stereotype and demonize the other. We depict them as horrible and destructive and dirty and ugly as possible so that they can be considered dispensable. And it occurred to me that although I don't think my mother was actually conscious of this, that maybe subliminally she was trying to save me. She was perhaps trying to preserve me. That it wasn't safe to not be beautiful in some particular way that had been sort of absorbed by her. When I was a teenager, I read the diary of Anne Frank. And when I read Anne Frank's diary, the burning question that I had was whether or not I would have the courage of the non-Jewish friends who supported her family in hiding to preserve them as long as possible at risk of torture and death. And I'm quite sure that I don't have that kind of courage. But I do feel deeply committed to the premise that it should be safe to walk in this world in the skin that we're in the religion and the ethnicity that we're in, and that we should be allies for one another as best we can, and that beyond even wonderful programs like this, we should figure out how to get into each other's lives and living rooms and gas stations and really make the relationships, forge the relationships, and then tell those stories and transform hearts and minds. And also, I'm deeply committed to the idea that we should have a world in which we don't have to hide in attics to be safe or pass in order to be safe, or a world which sadly is the world that we live in right now, in which a young man, a high school student at an affluent high school, came up to me after I'd finished a program and most of the other people had dispersed, and sort of pulled me aside and whispered in my ear, "Thank you so much for your program. I'm Muslim, but nobody here knows it." Thank you.
Hi. So I arrived in Italy and beelined straight to the Vatican, the mothership, right? I felt like I was visiting a great-grandmother, so I fixed my hair and I stood up straighter, and when I got there, there were hundreds of unmet cousins and nieces and uncles and aunts, and we shyly smile at each other. We are members of this great Christian family. I don't linger too long on their gaze because I don't want them to see my indiscretions. My premarital sex and my unannulled divorce, and that time I drove my friend to her abortion, and my transgender child who chose to stay at home. But I want to go to church. And so I wait until it's my turn to step into her sanctuary, and she does not disappoint. Her walls are adorned with relics and riches that have been billions of dollars spent on. And I am pulled in by this fragrance of her, this crushed clove and this wood polish and this burnt incense. And the murmuring of hymns and the flickering of prayer candles. And then the priest greets me at the door, and he wants me to, he wants me to leave. I wonder, can he smell all of those sins? Does God really keep a report card? And then as I listen, I realize, oh no, it's not my past that he's concerned about, it's my present state of disgrace. Yeah. My exposed, my unworthy, my sinful shoulders that are in danger of stealing God's thunder. He answers my questioning eyes in 5 words: "You need to cover up," and points towards the souvenir shop. I have to go buy a shawl. I say, "What if I don't have any money?" And I don't mean to be cheap, but I just like to question authority. And he scans my body, my Free People dress, my Nike sneakers, my diamond engagement ring, and he says, "You need to go buy a shawl." And I say, "Yes, of course, yes, I will. But just out of curiosity, what do you do with the poor if they can't afford? Do you have shawls to loan for those less fortunate?" Now he looks at me completely disdained for me and only points towards the souvenir shop. No more words for me from the skin Nazi. And so I walk to the souvenir shop past the baptismal area where I thought that I had been washed of all of my sins, but I suppose that holy water could not cleanse me of that hideous crime of being female. And at the shop, I begin to feel that familiar experience of shame. And I rummage through the shawls,
and I keep my eye on the sanctuary, and I can feel the skin Nazis staring at me, making sure I don't make a beeline to the sanctuary without buying the holy hijab. And I feel in that moment that I'm torn between my tribe that I love and my truth. And I look towards the crucifixion. I look towards my brother Jesus, and I see him naked. His bloody body broken and bruised. He's draped only in this diaper to cover his manhood. This horrific image is appropriate while my shoulders are not. And I ask, what would you have me do? I've come here to pray. Do I stay to pray? Do I pay to pray? And in that moment, I remember this current event of these 300 priests in Pennsylvania who are being called to task for the raping of children. And I understand in that moment that, of course, the Vatican needs my money to buy this shawl so that they can pay the millions of dollars to protect the innocent. Oh, not the children, the priests. This will be paid for by the guilt of my shoulders. And so I have my answer. It's pretty clear. And I need to walk out of the Vatican. And on the stoop of the Vatican, it begins to rain. And I'm not sure if that's coming from inside me or outside me. And I hear this voice that says, it's time to go. You can't stay here. You can't abort your truth. You need to follow the gospel of your heart. And I'm thinking, I don't even know what that means, the gospel of my heart. And so I place my hand on my heart. And suddenly this rainstorm turns into a whole holy tsunami. And I hear it ushering in poetry that I didn't know to speak. And I listen to this heart. And this heart, it says to me, if I told you of my heart, I would tell to you my home, the places I have lived, the lands that I have roamed as a gypsy, as a child, as a tramp, and then a thief. The truth I'd be confessing in the hopes of some relief. You see, my heart is not an organ. It's the address where I live. It's the tribes in which I've traveled. It's the things I can't forgive. Like the lack of understanding and compassion and decor, while America is weeping like a two-buck jilted whore. In the land of milk and honey with its sunny apple pie, little hands are in the White House and they're serving porn and lies. And I'm feeling all conflicted and evicted from my flag because it doesn't seem to notice that my child is in drag. And he needs to use the bathroom and there's no place for a piss. And the liberals are posting hashtag, we're not this, but we are. Because we're united in that U.S. kind of way, in the secrets we've been keeping and the words that we don't say. And the modern man is restless and the news does not seem sound. And we're building walls and running all the good folk out of town. And I cannot blame my country till I tell you of myself, confess my own infringements like a good elf on the shelf. Of my salty days in Jersey, Springsteen country, I was raised where we lived on buttered ends and all the fucks we never gave. And we learned to keep a distance, smirk like sly comedians, for the boys who wouldn't be busted would be bullied into men. On the playground where the sissies would be tortured into silence, and my Christian heart would learn to grow a tolerance for violence. And I raised my hand in question because I thought it made no sense. How come God doesn't love her children? Why would God put up a fence? And I felt my good blood boil when I thought I saw enough. But the church bells rocked me back to sleep, though the king is in the buff. And the hands that sought protection through confessions never heard were the same hands pressed in prayer and ordained worthy of the word. And how strongly they admonished just to amputate the truth. Forgive me, Father, I have sinned and find no comfort in your booth. You don't represent my stories, and you've cloaked me in your myths, where I'm cast as whore or virgin to negate my other gifts. And your gods have all been male, like the presidents and popes, and the female wage is shy of truth and justice holds no hope. And if you want to teach compassion, how about we start with that? How about we tell the children that a pussy is a cat? But soothe your sister's sorrows and say, please don't pick your scabs. Just ride it out. It's no big deal, so your body's up for grabs. And then we all remember, because the memory is there. The glance, the gaze, unwanted ways got tangled in our hair. The moment we were branded that summed us up as game. Not whole and holy women, but two boobs, a hole, and shame. But cover costs for the Viagra to ensure you come correct. Deny her pills, withhold her thrills, and leave her with the check. Send hearts filled with dictation, though she's still illiterate, and under wires, boost them higher, make some money off that tit. And post her face in all the tabloids, burn her daily, brand her twice, and it's good if we remind her it'll be nice if she plays nice. And point the finger over there where education is withheld and the threat of rape adorns escape and lives unparalleled. But let's not take a tally here. Let's all drink and just get drunk. And when suffering depression, blame it on the time of month. Let's not make a true confession. Let's not hold it up to light. Let's not be bold, for we've been told we really have no rights. Save your hearts for better times when words are worthy of their weight and the owner of my body is no longer for debate. Don't put lipstick on a dead girl. Don't pin up your pretty prose and don't pretend you're doing something to relieve us of the blows. Raise your daughters to have courage to feel that she is able is a joke if you have left no empty seats about your table. Raise your daughters to have courage to truly find her voice is drained of all validity if she has not the choice. And if you want our love, you'll need to know the places we have lived, and you will need to know the trauma of the fucks we didn't give. And you'll need to look still deeper to the words you didn't say and the roles that were forbidden, the inequity of pay and the constant degradation and the branding and the burn and the higher education never offered, never earned from a country of warmongers who still fear my bloody show. We've landscaped our mother's nature to ensure she will not grow. In a land of opportunity, her script is sealed with vows, and the beat it goes on playing to the slaughtering of cows. So my sweet, my dear, my fellow man, my funny Valentine, I know it's not the type of love note you were hoping I would pen, but our rivers all run red, and our children all are blue, and I heard you promise once that we would do all we could do. But I got a funny feeling that the ceiling won't be smashed. Our house will go on burning, leaving nothing in its ash. We'll buckle from the weight of our own domestic violence. And where once we stood the brave, we will surely fall the silenced. And I cannot be shamed. And I cannot be shawled. And I cannot and will not be silenced. Thank you.
Before I start my story, I'm going to ask you a favor and take a moment tonight, tomorrow, whenever you can, and pray for the people in the caravan coming from Honduras. Because I see the news every day and it's getting worse and worse. No kid ever grows up wanting to be an immigrant or a refugee. When I was a kid, I wanted to be a teacher, a lawyer, or a journalist. So even today, as a grown-up, whenever I see any of these professionals at work, I pay close attention to what they're doing. A couple of weeks ago, I was watching the news, but not because of my childhood dream of being a reporter, no. I was watching the news, and I was watching the reports about the current situation at the Mexico-USA border, and the inexcusable treatment by this administration of immigrant children. Immigrant children, some of them babies, as they are being ripped away from their parents' arms, only to be detained and put in cages. Thanks to the effort of many organizations that organize thousands of people to march on the street to the chants of families belong together, the situation at the border evolved in such a way that some of these families, only a few of them, are being reunited. I'm watching the news, and I'm watching the video clip of one of these reunions. I'm watching as the mother sees across the room the image of her small child whom she has not seen in weeks. She runs to her child, gets down on her knees, and she hugs her son. And she hugs him in such a way as if to make sure that no one will ever separate them again. But her child doesn't talk to her. Her child doesn't even look at her. Her child doesn't hug her back. And I wonder, maybe the kid is too traumatized, or maybe the kid is just mad at her. Maybe the kid blames her for everything that happened so far. And I think this because for a long time, that's the way I felt about my mother. When I was growing up in Guatemala, I was about 10 years old when my mother used to send me to the market to buy fabrics for her sewing business. She couldn't afford to send my dad because he had a drinking problem. But one day, my mom and I went together to the market, and I wasn't paying attention when somebody snuck on behind me and took the bags that I was carrying under my arms. I saw the thief running, and I took off running after them. Suddenly, I heard the voice of my mother, "Stop!" I stopped running, and the thief got away. A couple of months later, my parents immigrated to the United States, leaving me and my siblings in the care of grandparents. It took years for them to bring us to this country, and when they finally brought us here, we came here undocumented. And at first, I was happy to be reunited with my mother. But like many immigrants, I soon had to face the hardship of having to live in a country with a culture and a language I knew nothing of. I felt sad, I felt strange, I felt alone. And I started blaming my mother for bringing me here and taking me away from everything and everyone I knew back in Guatemala. In my senior year of high school, I learned that I had to give up my dream of being a reporter, a teacher, or a lawyer. My family was too poor and they couldn't afford to send me to college. And since I was undocumented, I could not apply for a scholarship. Again, I blamed my mother for bringing me to the USA undocumented. After graduation, I learned that I couldn't even marry my high school sweetheart because doing so would complicate my immigration status. Again, I thought, thanks to my mother. But by now, I was so upset that I decided that I was going to define my mother, and I got married anyway. Also, my girlfriend was pregnant, so we kind of had to get married. And after getting married, I soon realized that it was going to be difficult getting a good job without the proper documents. I started to work at a Taco Bell, at a fast food restaurant. One night in the restaurant, there were some kids making a lot of noise, so I went over there and I told them to be quiet. I don't know if the kids were drunk, high, or just acting stupid like kids do. But as I approached them, one of the kids reached over the counter and punched me in the face. So a few seconds later, I found myself jumping over the counter, trying to catch up to the kid, and I had a knife in my hand. The kid stood by the door, and for a few moments, I thought we were going to get into a fight. But at the last moment, his friends pulled him away. After they left, I found myself really upset. But not only at the kid that had punched me, but also at my current situation. And I found myself blaming my mother. I blame her for bringing me to the United States undocumented. I blame her for not having been able to finish my education. And I even blame her for having to work a shitty job. And I found myself thinking, maybe I had been better off in Guatemala. Now, while I was busy building resentment and losing my faith and getting mad at my mother had been working 3 or 4 jobs to save enough money for our multiple immigration procedures and to pay all the fines that we had to pay. She had gotten her papers, she had gotten her green card, and she had applied for me and my siblings to get our green cards. In one occasion, when my immigration application was denied because I had gotten married, my mother gave me an application that I had to fill up. But I was so upset that I took the application and I threw it in the garbage can. And then I left her house really upset. My mother went back to the garbage can, fished up the application, filled it up, enclosed a check, and sent it to immigration. I would have never gotten a green card if it wasn't because of my mother. But it wasn't until this year, 30 years after I came to this country, that I finally became a USA citizen. So the first thing that I did when I became a USA citizen was to call my mother to let her know that my application had been approved. And I also called to apologize and to ask her one question that had been on my mind all this time. Mom, when did you realize that we had to leave Guatemala? You remember the day at the market when you were running after the thief? You know why I asked you to stop running? Because you thought that I couldn't catch him? I say, because I knew that you could catch him. And I knew that he probably had friends that were going to hurt you. That day, I knew that we had to leave Guatemala because I was going to keep sending you to the market, and sooner or later, you were going to get hurt. I knew exactly what she meant. Because even if I had stayed in Guatemala and I had gotten an education, any of my dream professions would have gotten me in trouble with the Guatemalan government. Teachers and lawyers who were trying to educate the population were being accused of being communists and put in jail. Reporters who tried to tell the population about abuses of the government were being threatened with violence or to be put in jail. And if I had tried to fight the government armed with a degree, the government was not going to walk away like the kids at the restaurant. The government was going to make me disappear like the millions of people disappear. So that moment I understood all of my mother's struggles, and I knew that she was right. So I apologized to her for all that years that I built resentment against her. We hugged and we cried. That was months ago. But a few weeks ago, as I'm watching the reports on the news, I cannot help but think about my own immigration experience and think about what would happen if me and my brothers had been caught at the border and separated from our parents and being put in cages. Or what would happen if I had stayed in Guatemala and later in life I had to try to cross the border with my own kids only to have them ripped away from my arms. I'm thinking about all this as I'm watching the video of the mother being reunited with her kid. And I see that the kid is no longer looking away. The kid is looking at his mother. The kid is smiling at his mother, and his little arms are moving to embrace her. This young, beautiful, brave kid has managed in a few minutes. He has managed to understand what took me years to understand, that it was not his mother's fault that they had to leave the country, and that all the pains and suffering are not her fault. She is trying to give him a chance, a life, freedom, and the pursuit of happiness. And as they hug, they cry. And as they cry, I cry. I cry out for justice. I cry tears of anger. But this is no longer the misguided anger of my youth. No, this is anger with a purpose. To fight for those immigrant children the same way that my mother fought for me. And to use the anger to protest, to march, and to help people understand that children do not belong in cages. And the families belong together. Thank you.
So I am sitting in a pew in the back of church. Is there anywhere else to sit? And there is a man sitting behind me talking away to himself, just chatting away. Now, this is not normal. Church has started. Now is quiet time. So I decide I'm going to turn and just take a quick peek at him to see what's going on, right? Could be homeless, could be crazy. Who knows what's going on in my very urban New York City church. And so I look at him, and he gives me a big smile. He seems happy. I am not. I just returned from a profound and life-changing trip to the Middle East. I just spent 3 weeks interviewing Iraqi refugees and hearing their stories. 3 weeks of killings and kidnappings and chaos. 3 weeks of terror and torture and tea. 3 weeks of shouting and shootings and oh shits. 3 weeks of listening to stories that nobody should ever have to hear, let alone live. 3 weeks of uncle kidnapped, father killed, children threatened, mother scared. 3 weeks of please do not feed us, mother, we are dead already. 3 weeks of I am human before I am Iraqi. 3 weeks of America, you said you were going to help us. 3 weeks, 4 million Iraqi refugees were homeless, and I was back in the United States, helpless and angry, so angry, and in church, looking for something. And this man behind me is still talking. Chatty McGee back here, I don't know what's going on. And so during the greeting, I decide to greet him, and I look at him again, and he gives me a very large smile, and I give him a very small fake one. And I sit back down, and I cannot believe this, he's actually singing now. He's actually singing. This man is singing behind me. I'm trying to listen to the sermon. Everyone else is able to listen to the sermon. I'm here. I'm at my rope's end here, and I don't know what to do. And this man won't stop singing, and I can't get the Iraqis out of my brain. I can't think about anything else but them sitting in the exact same spot they are sitting while I am here sitting in this pew. And singing McGee behind me is louder than ever, and I can't hear the sermon, and I can't focus. And so I decide I'm just going to fold my hands, and I'm going to pray. Dear God, please, I cannot do this alone. I cannot do any of this alone. I don't know how to do this. Please help me. Jesus, walk with me. Be with me, Jesus. Show yourself to me, Jesus. And the service ends, and my prayer ends, and everything feels about the same, including talkie pants behind me. And so before I leave, I decide I have to be a better Christian, welcome the stranger, right? And so I turn to him and I say, "Hi, you must be new here. Welcome." "Oh, yes," he says. "Oh, I like it here very much. Very wonderful place." "I'm Kim." "Oh, yes, of course, of course. I am Jesus." What did he just say? There's no way he just said Jesus, right? He had to have said Jesus or Jesus. There's no way he just said Jesus. He could not have just said Jesus. "I am Jesus." Really, God? Really? I almost fall over that I would sit on this day of all days, that I would sit and meet Jesus, the man, this man called Jesus. And I feel for the first time in a very, very long time, heart-shaking, laugh out loud gratitude. "Hello, Jesus," I say. "I'm glad you're here." Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now am found. Was blind, but now I see.
I want to first say thank you to all of our amazing storytellers for your truth, your courage, for your stories, your words, for allowing us to share those with you. And I want to thank everyone here also for being present to receive the stories, to hear the stories, for being patient with us because sometimes stories take longer to tell than we intend. And because we are over on time, I'm going to go right into inviting Ayana up to bless us and bless our food, and invite all of us, please, storytellers, stay and join us for community lunch after this so that we can share and reflect with you. But right now, Ayana.
Friends, I invite you to stand with me if you are able. May you taste the colors of fall. May you touch the chorus of dawn. May your eyes turn toward the beauty even when it's gone. May you weave a path of blessing through good times and grief. May you tend the flame within you. May you feed it with belief. May you find yourself in strangers and meet them within you. May you trust that we are windows the world is peering through. May you linger in each moment, receiving with your heart the gift of possibilities that presence can impart. May the prayers that grow within you bloom in many lands. We are woven of connections, and may peace be in our hands. As we part to break bread together, may God dwell among us. May God bless the food we are about to receive for the nourishment of our bodies. And may God bless the fellowship we have together. Amen, Amen, and Ashe.